Welcome back, everybody. Anthony Russell, banners on the wall here, and well, as the I seem to be getting busier as the season's coming closer and closer to an end. And another man who has been very, very busy across world ice hockey in the last little while is a man we sort of exist in a bit of a Venn diagram because, of course, former Guildford Flame, and I spend a lot of time in Guildford these days. Former Whitelink Raider, and I spent a fair bit of time on the island after those days. Can't say I've ever come any closer than he has to the one that is Fishermania. But the man who is behind the ReTribe Collective, I'm joined by Nick Rothwell. Nick, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to me.
Anthony, thank you so much for giving me the time. Congratulations on your milestone and all of the work that you do. I'm a big fan of yours and Nikki's and Ben's and the guys at 3on3 and what you guys are doing for keeping and helping grow the UK hockey community is really amazing. So well done to you, buddy.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. I am fascinated by the ReTribe process, by the premise behind it. One of the things I think, before we get too deep into it, because I think one of the things that both of us are quite interested in, albeit maybe in slightly different ways, stories are massively important, not just for collective memory, but personal formation, reaffirmation, growth. And I think there's something to be said for just how important stories can be to a person, good and bad.
You're so right. There was an American novelist, I believe his name is Jonathan Powers, I believe, but he was talking about how storytelling is so needed today because we're so divided. And of course, you and I might have differing opinions on something. And if we were sit there maybe in a pub or over a coffee shop and argue or disagree over it, I'm probably not going to get you to change your mind, right? I'm not going to get you to change your belief. However, through storytelling and through experience and people listening to stories, people's opinions can shift and change. It's just a nice, gentle way for people to go, hey, my ideas don't need to be fixed. My opinions don't need to be fixed. If I hear something that resonates with me through a story, I'm more likely to be malleable around shifting an ideology to which was one maybe leaning left to all of a sudden going center or right, just for a kind of a metaphor. It's just a gentle way to help cultures evolve and help ideologies that shape the cultures evolve, rather than kind of like a pulpit top down, hey, we need to do this and this and this. So you're right. Storytelling is a huge part of I think what we do as humans, and it's something that we've kind of lost track of. And that's why I think, again, podcasts are such an important part of today's world, and people, given they don't have a lot of time to do stuff where maybe opinions can shift, more or less people have an hour a day to put on a podcast. So you're right, man. Storytelling is really, really important.
I think it's interesting you mentioned about the idea of the bully pulpit, because of course BOTW is a one-man show. It's been a one-man show for the entirety of its thing. So I'm always very conscious, and one of the big things I sort of say to people is disagreement is not disaster. And I do think of a friend of mine within ice hockey. I won't mention them by name for fear of embarrassing them, but we are very, very opposite people in terms of our outlook on life and some of our approaches to things. But one of the things I think we've always managed to be able to do is to have the discussion, and that disagreement is not disaster. You can actually, an understanding sometimes where a person is coming from doesn't make you change, it doesn't make your opinions change, doesn't make your values change, but realizing how a person has come to the point that they are at is sometimes more important than the point that they are making. And I think sometimes it's really, really easy, especially in a very aggressive, pressure driven world like ice hockey can be. It's the fastest, hardest sport on earth, and sometimes I think that the surface level emotion sometimes gets lost in kind of the rest of the iceberg that's below the surface. Sometimes it can be very, very hard to be in a space like that for humans.
For sure, and especially when your loyalty to a club is so big, and when social media is out there for people to namelessly comment on others, and we're in a world now where it's very easy to tear people down, and I think that this is where the shift needs to happen, Anthony. And it's we need to start helping each other rise. That means being more compassionate, more open-minded, more vulnerable, more empathetic. And hockey is a small, I mean, yes, it's a growing community, but it's still a small community. It's still a family. And I think we have the opportunity in the UK to really nurture hockey. And I always have this saying about being able to maximize everyone's experience. So right from, you know, the supporter who's using his hard-earned money, his and her hard-earned money to bring the family or to go themselves to their community to be part of something. They have all the right to be able to feel a passion towards their team, up to the GMs, the Kirk Humphreys, as we talk about, you know, the coaches, the captains, the assistant captains, the players, the officials that make sure the games can happen, and then the parents that are the taxi drivers, the banks, and the cheerleaders for their teams, and then the players, and being able to, you know, to really use what is, as you say, it's the fastest, it is the toughest. I think it is the best team sport on the planet for so many reasons, because I mentioned a lot about a guy named Sebastian Junger, who wrote a book called Tribes, and he was an American war correspondent during the first Iraqi wars. And he noted how such strong bonds are made in the military and in services, because really you're putting, you know, your life on the line. And then in these really vulnerable moments, very strong bonds are connected between human beings. And hockey is a game that is extremely competitive, and it's very physical. So it's today's modern world of being able to of people being able to create these bonds. So it is such a unique sport, and I think that because we fit under the our own kind of culture, we can start shifting and shaping that culture again once. So a culture that doesn't create harm. And that can come right down to a coach who has that power over threat-based leadership that might be creating some trauma, some fear within their organization, to supporters who might namelessly start shaming people and arguing online in very kind of harmful ways. So I think we've got a great sport and a great opportunity to start shaping it so that people can have some real, true joy in what I think is the greatest game on the planet.
You've been very open about your personal story about how you kind of got to the point where ReTribe started becoming a thing. And I was looking on the ReTribe website, and bits of there's in the little about section you've got like a bunch of statistics, and I'd be fascinated to see the sources for those, because I like noodling in those bits and pieces as someone who's spoken to Dr. Vic Silverwood over time. But I think it's something like 85% of retired athletes do not feel supported after their career, is one of the statistics that you've got on your website. And that was one of the things that kind of struck me. I was a mediocre at best rugby player as a young man. I got county trials and never got kind of higher than that point. And when I had to stop playing rugby because my neck took a bit of a pounding as I was a front row forward, there was a part of me that was just like, oh, well, I never get this experience ever again. And there was a part of me that was sad for it, but also I was quite happy to not have to, like need neck surgery or anything like that. But I can only imagine, after the fierce kind of cauldron that ice hockey can be, and what it's like, having been in a locker room, albeit at a very, very different level, to suddenly that cutoff point and there be nothing at all. And my interview with Brad Bonello from one of the guys who's been in Shawsey, he touched on it very, very briefly as well, about that feeling about wanting to carry on, and his led him to doing things like doing Shawsey, like playing in for teams in the Allen Cup and things like that. But it's a horrible thought as a human being that the entire structure of the first 30, 35, 40 years of your life is just cut away like that. Mm-hmm. And then you're essentially kind of cut adrift. It almost feels unnatural.
Yeah. And it's just one that not many people, definitely when I played, no one was really equipped with the tools to be able to do that. I always tell the very sad story that I don't remember my last game. And I know I was registered with the Guildford Flames. I was playing with Stan Marple. He was happy for me to be there. We got along really well as a coach and a player. And I don't remember my last game, Anthony. And it's really kind of sad, because there was no goodbye, there was no handshakes, there was no farewell. It was just, I was gone. And that happens to so many guys, particularly in the UK. We don't know if it's going to be the end of our year. We don't know. We definitely don't make enough money to start piling it away for retirement or for business endeavors. So really, it's just this kind of community and connection, accountability, purpose, identity that's woven into you from the time you're 4 or 5 years old up until, for me, it was like 28, 29, and then it's gone. And what I missed the most was the accountability that the changing room gave me. So it's not even something that teams can really, they can keep contact with you, and they can offer recruitment advice, insurance advice, financial advice, something that we're doing at ReTribe, to prepare people for the transition. But no one can really replicate that locker room. And that's what I missed. And I always tell it in my story, is like from the age of 30 to 45, I just became a lone wolf. I had no one to keep me accountable. I didn't have children, so I was able to move to LA and to Canada. And in Canada, I was in Winnipeg, and then Saskatoon, and then Calgary, and Calgary back to Saskatoon, all within the space of about like a year and a half, and then back to London. And again, I would always be building my life up, but all the relationships I had, no one was concerned about my drinking or any kind of habits that a teammate might be like, hey, Nick, a little concerned about your behavior there. So that's the real one of our big pillars, is the accountability creator that we have with regards to retired or transitioning players, is to make sure we stay connected, stay accountable, have the tools, the peer-to-peer support that we offer. Again, in my journey, I mean, no psychologist or therapist or doctor was going to help me. It took a group of people who understood what I was going through for me to actually trust them, to then believe in the process. So that's another pillar of what we do, is the peer-to-peer support, which is, helping get folks stay accountable. And for the last 2 years now, Anthony, we've been doing it with a group of people, some still playing, some had just transitioned, and River Rimshaw, he's happy for me to always use him as a case study. He was playing in Cardiff, and we worked quite well together in terms of helping him with some of his recovery. And then also supporting him through the transition into work life after. And now he's got a great job at a tech company in Austin, and he's thriving in life, right up to guys who have been, they're in their 60s and they stepped away from the game. And some of them would say that they wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for ReTribe, which was, and I hate to say it was a big motivator in me really focusing on UK hockey over the last couple of years, was the passing of Dale Keane. And just having a text message saying another one, and something really shifted in my heart. It was like, we can never stop anyone from taking that decision. But what we can do, and what we have responsibility to do, is to give people the tools to make better decisions so as not to harm themselves or others. So that being said, that's why we are where we are today, and that is a big part of our why.
I think one of the things I find when I speak to people about the concept of accountability, and I think despite being married with a child, I can be a very individual person. I think if you speak to Nikki, he will tell you that I'm not like I'm a man who knows his own mind. I think the issue sometimes for people is that accountability has always come in the previous form of that being talked down at rather than to and with. And it feels like, and accountability to people can sometimes feel like just being told off and you are bad. And actually the true accountability is you might be going down the wrong path here, why not come back and try and do something else, and kind of be wrapped around, it's an arm around the shoulder, not a hand around the throat. To kind of bring people back. And the quite polarized world we live in, given the fact that obviously everybody who's doing people doing ReTribe at the moment are obviously subject to that, how hard have some of the people found it to kind of really, have you seen that light switch go on in people's heads? Oh, actually this is not what I thought it was, this is not what I thought it could be, and coming around to this idea that actually this is such a really helpful tool for a lot of people.
Every week we do like a Zoom call on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and new people feed into it. And every single one of them was like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting that." And it's because what happens, and it's been really a proof of concept that which we wanted to try before we invested, a sizable chunk of money into building an app, which will do all of this idea around accountability, is that we can have a home life, and you can have a work life, and you can have a sport or a team that you play with after. Just a rec hockey or something like that. So you can have little groups of people that you might be accountable in some way, but there's always tends to be something that we don't want to share with one or two or all of those groups. It's like just something that we might be feeling a little bit embarrassed over, or have a little bit of anxiety over. We might be putting on, let's say, a little bit too much weight. We might be sneaking some donuts in, halfway through the morning, and really going, why? And we don't want to tell our wife, but yet she's noticing maybe our jeans are fitting a little tight, and we don't want to tell anything at the work because, we've got a 5-kilometer charity run coming up or something like that. We don't want to tell anyone on the team because, we're trying to make it into the playoffs. So you might be feeling some kind of embarrassment around it. So the proof was around my own journey, which is that when people are in a small tribe, and we found that the number being around 6, any less than 3 can be a date, and anything over 6 can become, there's some power dynamics shift. But when you're in a group of, say, me and 5 other people, and we have some common challenges together, we're more likely to sit and listen and to be compassionate. And that's where the accountability comes in. It's like, why do these people show up on a Tuesday and a Thursday night? And it was the same reason why I used to show up on the island at 9:30 at night after a long day at university when it was raining out, and I'd have to go down the pier, and I was all wet, and I'd be like, man, I can go home. My wife is there, my dog's there, there's a fire. Or I go to the rink and get out of my wet clothes and get into a damp, and I just, but you did it because you were part of a team, and you didn't want to let the team down because you were on the power play or on the PK, so the team would be missing something in the dynamics of their practice. So people show up. They might be feeling really good with themselves. Everything's good. They had a day without a donut, but they show up because they don't want to let the other people down, because they know the other people are there because they still are looking for some connection and some community. And then they end up sharing to everybody, hey, I didn't have a donut today. And then everyone lights up because, like, wow, man, he did it. I'm going to really try hard tomorrow too. So this is a way where, like, come boats in a harbor, and tides are coming in, there's storms, there's calm days, but we're always latched together. And that means that we're going to rise together, and we're going to ride this all out together, rather than what I did for 15 years, which is just kind of get on that choppy water by myself, and try to figure things out. So it really is the idea that accountability is for yourself and for others, not in a kind of a you have to do this way, but in a way of, like, I don't want to let them down way.
I'm fascinated to hear about the work of I want to make sure I say her name. Is it Misha? Misha. Yeah. Apologies. There's one of those names. You look at it, and because it's Misha Jervis, who's your sports psychologist that you've got involved. I'm fascinated to hear about her input, because, of course, it's very, with a lot of things in hockey, there's a lot of really, really good intent, and with things that around hockey, people always want hockey people involved, because there's that predilection I find within hockey that if you don't know the game, you can't kind of get involved in the game. But having a properly trained sports psychologist involved to give it that structure, for me, it's like massively important, because as a hockey player to hockey player, you as a person will be able to kind of get that trust, having played on the ice for that Misha would not necessarily be able to get in that kind of way. But tell me about her work with what you guys are doing, because I'm really interested to hear about that sort of structural backbone behind what goes on.
Misha's one of the most, like, I admire her. She's like on the top. She's a pillar in my life. And she was a sports psychologist in the UK before they existed. So she was a young woman growing up in North London, and was doing rhythmic gymnastics at the Sobel Center when it first opened up. So, we're talking quite some time ago. She was actually, funny enough, Gabby Logan from BBC, as her gymnastics coach. So there's all these little kind of ties into the past. She was also my ex-girlfriend's gymnastics coach, who was Gabby's best friend. But so Misha took herself off to Florida, I think in the late 70s and early 80s, and she did a sports degree there. And she was the only woman in a very male-dominated environment for decades. And she came back to the UK, and she wrote most of the sports curriculum, sports psychology curriculums for universities there. And she's the lead sports psychologist at Brunel University. She was the England Lionesses' first sports psychologist. So she's been involved in elite level football for decades, and working with the FA and the PFA as a consultant, and with the Olympic gymnastics. So she knows sport, right? So she studies sport, and she worked with QPR in their academy for years, and started to look at the dynamics between the coaches, the players, and the parents. And when I came back to London in 2019, someone was listening to her on the BBC radio and said, "Nick, you need to speak to Misha." And I just remember the name. I Googled it. I found her email at Brunel. I reached out to her. She said, "Come and tell me about what you're doing." And this is about 7 years ago now. And I told her my story. And I said, we had all these common things in like these things in common, like Gabby and Carrie, and our love for sport and football, because I'm a big football fan and a lover of football as well, because I played it since that was always going alongside of hockey for me as an athlete in Canada. So, and I told her about my journey, and I told her what the 12 steps in recovery did for me, and how they're transformational in this way. And I was like, they're really good for guys like me that are alcoholic, but what about the 90% of the population that needs some kind of program in their lives, particularly athletes, to create some balance in their life? And that was the creation of this program. And the name of it, Tough Through Tender, was really inspired, through lockdown, and how a lot of people were having trouble around this toxic masculinity. And there was a lot of, and now it's on the rise again because of manosphere. But I was really, is it toxic masculinity, or is it an imbalance in masculine traits? And the masculine traits that are being really prominent in masculine and male prioritized sports, or prioritized is not the right word, but typically male sports, like ice hockey, football, rugby, where you have this imbalance in masculine traits, because really things like compassion and vulnerability and tenderness are just posh, like blah 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 blah. Don't talk about that, and emotional dexterity, emotional regulation. I don't want that in my locker room. I want grit, determination, toughness. Do it till we go through a wall for somebody. All of these man up kind of slogans, right? And what we've known, Anthony, is that all we know is what we know. Right? All of the world championships in any sport have been won the way they've been won. But is there something behind it? Do we always need to just be tough? Or have we ever been in a room when someone's shown emotion and vulnerability and compassion, and a chill has gone up our spine, and we have felt this power rise inside of us when someone gives an emotional speech or something, and it's like, wow, that's emotional. So then it started to be like, hey, if we have a better relationship with our emotions, we can tap into a power source, and that's the evidence that we've been able to do. Is we've been running on a coal-fired power plant, right? It works. Turns the lights on. It's great, but it does kind of have some black pollution, some black smoky clouds, some toxic stuff happens every once in a while. Whereas behind that, there is a power source, and I think I call it the human power source. And we've just shut it down. It's been dormant. And that is fed off of toughness and tenderness and everything in between. And it was the talk that I gave at the World Championships, is the full spectrum of our humanness. So that was really the idea of tough through tender, in language that really relates to athletes. And she wrote it all. So it's her program. And it's her experience, and she's very, it's not that she doesn't like social media. She's not on it. So you don't hear a lot of her on social media. But she's the driving force behind what we do on a kind of certified level. And then every year she's training more sports psychologists, and one or two of them have started following the hockey over the last 2 years, working with some clubs with this program, and they've really excelled in what they're doing, these clubs. And one of the guys, one of the psychologists, is writing his PhD on hockey and emotional regulation, and all the kind of the things that I speak about in the World Championship talk. If anyone wants to see, it's online at the Coaches Symposium. But the idea of, like, where did we learn about coaching, and there's a history to it, and it comes after post World War II recreation sports and its creation, and the people who had time to do it were normally from the military, because they the aristocracy, and they were people who led under the fact that if you don't do this, you could die. So that was woven into our coaching culture. And really, did it work? It has worked. Do we need to do it now? Has it created harm? Yes, it has. So let's unlearn some of the bad stuff, keep the good stuff, and then move forward.
Sort of talk about the power of emotion. It strikes me that thought of at the end of the final game of the Stanley Cup Finals, no matter who wins, there's players on both sides crying, and you can pretty much guarantee it. And it kind of and that feels like at times with hockey that when an end point hits, you're allowed to be emotional, because then you can stop and you can kind of let it all out. And actually, whilst it makes for great viewing and a great story, possibly not the healthiest of ways to have your emotions bottled up until April, May, or June, and then letting them out at one big crescendo point right at the end of it. You touched on your talks at the World Championships, and I'm interested to hear from you about that, kind of telling it, because as you mentioned, British hockey is a growing, but at times quite parochial community. At times we are quite small. You walk up the steps and you stood on the stage, and actually that's a chapter point of a couple of years worth of really, really hard work, not just in kind of getting yourself into a position where this was something that you were doing and comfortable to do it, but also as well actually taking something and kind of putting it into a much bigger, much more influential space within our sport on a strategic high level. What was going through your mind walking up the steps at that point?
Well, I always get nervous.
Apart from don't click the wrong slide, because everybody does that on their PowerPoint.
I always get nervous, but I was always good at live TV, so I was nervous. But the thing that made me nervous was the fact that there were 250 coaches in that room. And the IIHF did give me a little heads up that my talk would probably make some people feel uncomfortable, because it really was around, we need to do better. So I was always watching my words. So I was careful not to kind of the pulpit preach type thing, but I was there to try to give ideas. But I was on the stage with Greg Cronin. He was the head coach of the Anaheim Mighty Ducks at the time, Anaheim Ducks. Steve Briere, who was he was the goalie coach at Seattle and played up in Fife and in the UK, and Jessica Campbell. So I'm on a stage with these guys going, oh, what the heck, So there was a bit of imposter syndrome going on. We all feel, but the message is that we know more now. We know more about sports psychology. We know that creating a fear environment is not inclusive, is not going to create a winning environment. When you create a fear environment, you're sure they might listen to you as a coach. They might respect you even, but they're going to be operating at around 60 to 75% max in practices for fear of making mistakes, because the last time someone made a mistake, you bag skated them, right? So we know that this stuff just doesn't, creating an environment of yelling and breaking sticks, although it's happened. And we see, some of our early memories growing up watching a Hockey Night in Canada was seeing Don Cherry, yelling over the boards and stuff. And everyone's like, I need to coach like that. So we have these ideas of what it's like to be a coach because of things that we've seen, when really what I was presenting to them is that we know more now so we can do better. And that means about every player on your team is different. We all have different traumas and fears and expectations, and it takes a lot of work, but a coach does need to if they want to have a successful culture, is to form a relationship with each player. And I know a lot of coaches say that they have these open door policies, but a lot of coaches are still unapproachable because of these fears of losing their spot, being judged, not being accepted, maybe even being fired. So, even we were talking about some of the GMs that I've spoken to, a lot of the GMs in the Elite League, and they're friends of mine, and they know about the work that we're doing. I know this is on from the IIHF talk, but a lot of the responses are, Nick, we're doing enough. So that's the thing with these coaches. A lot of these coaches were saying, oh, we do enough. We do enough. But there's a lot of our evidence shows that players would rather talk to us than their coach and their GM, their captains and their assistant captains, because we don't have a report back system. It stays with us. So that was the whole message with these coaches. And a lot of coaches feel like the ownership, the weight of the world is on their shoulders. So what I said, I don't think it was controversial. I was nervous. I was on the stage with some pretty cool people, but I think that a lot of people came up to me after saying they not only want to be a better coach, but they want to be a better parent. They want to be a better partner. They just want to try to do better. And as I will speak about men, because I am a man and I work with a lot of men, we're not given the tools, around emotional regulation, around how we can create safer environments, not just in our home, but in the coaching world. And I had to do a lot of unlearning, Anthony, in my journey. It was Eddie Joseph that brought me back on the ice, bless him, in Lee Valley. And my first session back on the ice was up at Sobel. And I yelled at somebody, 12-year-old learn to play kid, and I was like, I'm getting out there. I need to show that they need to respect me. Right. And that was stuff that I learned growing up in Saskatchewan in the 80s. And I yelled, and this girl, her legs started to shake. I get emotional when I talk about this because it breaks my heart that I did that. And I was like, what have I done? This girl's just come out, learn to play. She's got mismatched gloves and skates, and she's just coming out to play and have some fun. And I have this ego that says they need to know that I'm the boss, which is, and any coach listening to this, they'll say that that's not me. But, it is a few. And at least I say this, that I had the self-awareness to go in after, and I brought her and her mother together, and I explained, that I had made a mistake, and that I'm going to try better. And it was a learning thing, and I think that's the other thing coaches can take from this, is that if we make a mistake, we apologize. You're going to build really strong bonds with your teammates, because we have this expectation that coaches need to be perfect. But that's far from the truth. We need to be more human, and humans make mistakes. And if we own our mistakes, that's through vulnerability and compassion, very strong bonds can be created.
No lesson is ever a bad thing unless you refuse to learn from it. And we do love a good Eddie Joseph mention. God rest him.
Yeah.
I would take my imaginary hockey player. We'll call him Bobby Joe Jackson. He sees ReTribe, thinks that it might be something that can help him. What does the onboarding process look like? I hate using that term, but it works really, really well and it makes sense. But what does it look like when somebody contacts ReTribe wanting to get involved with bits and pieces?
It always leads to a phone call. It always leads to a phone call or a Zoom, so we can see each other face to face, or through technology. But email, an email is you hit click and join, and email comes out. And we are developing a mobile application that's going to make this process a lot easier. But it all comes to a phone call. And I get through social media too a lot of. Did you say it's Bobby Joe? Who's the guy's name?
Yeah, we just made up a name.
Bobby Joe's. A lot of Bobby Joes will DM me and reach out to me, and it always leads into a phone call and a conversation about what's blocking this person, where the challenges are. And then we have a bunch of these ambassadors, right? Like Tony Hand, Liam Kirk, Logan Nielsen, Patrick Larkin, Sam Line, Tristan Robbins, Beth Hill in Guildford. These are now people and they've all been given information about ReTribe. They all really believe in it. So here's an example. Logan Nielsen has a teammate that they drive to and from practices and to games together. I can say his name. His name is Ben Brown. And Ben Brown's telling Logan how he's struggling. And Logan goes, Kate, you need to talk to Nick at ReTribe. So an exchange of phone numbers. I have a call with Ben. We arrange a Zoom call. He tells me about how his challenges are, that he's played over, I think it was around 140 plus games in the IHL as a professional with no goals. And he said, this is really, really like, I'm just getting like, so we had a few sessions together. We did some reframing. We did some remembering. We did some unlearning. We did some perspective work on other people. We did roles, like his role in the team. And so lo and behold, and there was this thing of like every game, and there was a game less for him to score his goals. And we were just like, it doesn't matter, right? You're not there to score goals. You're there to be a good, solid defenseman and a good teammate and everything. Of course, scoring goals feels good for everybody, right? And in the bottom of my heart, I wanted this guy to score a goal. And lo and behold, last week against Coventry, he sniped, and it was a nice goal. He paused, he waited, and he just shelved it, and he scored his first professional goal. So that's just an example, like, of how things work, is that people just, through storytelling, through experience, people hear about us, through referrals, through talks, a conversation is had. If he would needed to talk to a sports psychologist, he would have talked to Misha or one of the team. But this was a conversation that me and him just had, and a few little chats that we had, and like I say, he scored his first professional goal. I'm not saying that has anything to do with me. He did the work, but the process, Anthony, is that most people out there have some kind of disconnect or block in their lives, right? And that is a player, a coach, officials who we worked with as well, and parents. If we think we have to have all of the answers ourselves, we're going to really struggle, and that's going to put a lot of weight and anxiety and fear on our shoulders. But the simple act of reaching out for some help and some guidance is just relief. And that's what we're here for, is a non-judgmental place. We don't report back to anybody. And it's not a question of if we can help you, it's how we can help you. We will find resources. We have them ourselves, or if we have to look externally, and it stays within us. And this is our business model. This is why we're here. So I think that's how a Bobby Joe would reach out to us, is just through social medias, through the website, through referrals, and in the reaching out. Wow, what a big first step.
I was having a conversation with somebody, because we had a leak in our roof here just before Christmas, and there was that horror. There's those sort of moments that you sort of get where everything sort of washes over you. Of, oh, I need to get the roofer in, and how am I going to fix this bit, and how am I going to fix this bit? Well, I'm not a roofer, so I need to speak to somebody who fixes roofs, and I've got water damage in the paintwork, so I need to speak to a decorator. But actually, sometimes that moment of just going, I need to get the help I need to achieve the task I want to achieve, or achieve this change that I want to achieve, is sometimes and that is sometimes the biggest block. And once you've climbed to the top of that hill, we'll take that donut from earlier, and it will eventually roll down the hill the other side. You mentioned him because, of course, big news for Sam Lyon the other day that the GB roster is out, and a couple of names familiar to ReTribe, a couple of your ambassadors in there. Sam off to Colgate University next year. Massive, huge program. As a big fan of Ken Dryden, my favorite hockey writer. Always good to see some good British lads end up at Colgate. But we do need to touch on Liam, because top goal scorer in the DEL. He has, and I remember him in a face cage playing in Basingstoke, which terrifies me to look at him now, like 10 years later, as the top scorer in one of the top leagues in Europe. For a long time, it kind of felt like young British kids didn't quite have some of these really, really big role models. So they were NHLers who kind of felt a little bit unobtainable for them. And there's something to be said for for having dreams and having really, really big goals and reaching really, really far. But there's something to be said about feeling that it's obtainable. Liam is such a well-adjusted young man, has worked really, really hard. And for some of those young kids, and yes, British hockey development isn't the best, and you're based in Czechia now, where the system is a bit more robust and a little bit better, arguably. But kids can look to someone like a Liam Kirk and a Sam Lyon and say, actually, British hockey starting hockey in Great Britain can take me to some really, really big places. Yeah. And hopefully, and obviously for guys like you at ReTribe, it's about those extra bits around them. They can put in the hard work, but there's the support will help get them to another level.
Yeah. I think about Liam and also Patrick, who's playing in Montreal. Patrick Larkin, who's the son of Brian, who's an old friend of mine, and Sam, and then playing their hockey abroad. And part of me is like, it'd be great if they could play in the UK, right? And inspire people that way. But then also part of me is like, man, you get to see the world with hockey, right? So it's not just about aspiring to be the next Sheffield Steeler or Nottingham Panther or Fife Flyer or Solid Devil, right? It's not about like you. This is a stepping stone to do stuff in this community. So Liam, as you said, is such a nice. He's such a well-adjusted human being, but he's also curious, right? So he's really curious about how the tough through tender works. He's really curious about being a human. He's really curious about emotional regulation. So it wasn't just a question of him like saying, "Hey, I'm going to support this." He's actually really curious about how it works. and the name behind it, the ReTribe. So all of them, all of our ambassadors are not just wearing the hats. They're actually getting involved. They're learning about the program, because if they're going to refer someone to it, they need to believe in it. And yeah, I think we're blessed today that these guys can play where they play, and that we have social media, and we have YouTube, and we have guys like you talking about it, and Nikki and Ben, because then it's more accessible, and they're seeing, wow, Liam Kirk's ripping up in the DEL. Tristan Robbins, son of Trevor Robbins, was drafted by the San Jose Sharks. He's playing his hockey in Europe, and yes, he's even though he's British born, he's playing his hockey around Europe. Beth Hill, I met her at the Women's World Championships. What an amazing person, what an amazing example, hard worker, who is just, again, they're all honored to be part of this. And that's the thing where you're like, wow, we've been doing this work. We've got actual proven results that what we're doing is working. And then we've got these, this like studs and studettes of hockey that are representing us. And it's really a thing that we want young people to be able to say, we have a lot of pressure really driven from parents for their children to play at the highest level that the parent wants them to play. And I think this is, again, a reframing of the tools that we can give parents through storytelling of, hey, I just want my kid to have fun. I want my kid to have joy in his life. I don't want him to feel pressure at 9 years old, about making elite player pathways. And these are the things that we can work on. And these are the things that all of our ambassadors are very aware of, is that, not a lot of kids make it to pro, but a lot of kids learn from being part of a team, and learn accountability, and learn teamwork and hard work. And if we can really nurture that, and again, an environment that I like to say, I don't know where it came from, whether it was Google or something like that, but like do no harm, or the Hippocratic Oath or whatever, but let's not do any harm. We not just hockey, but in sport culture, there's been a lot of harm created, through power over threat-based leadership, egos, and fear. They've created a lot of harm. And I think that if we can all be aware that has happened and is still happening, and hey, there's some tools so we don't create harm, and we can actually bring back joy into this game. And I always, refer to Alexander Ovechkin when he broke Gretzky's record. He was on every sports channel and social media channel for 2 weeks. And all he kept saying, it's fun. It's fun. It's fun. Right? So let's start having fun again. I'm not saying we're going to break goal scoring records, but that's why we're there. We're there to have fun.
Certainly, as you say, scoring goals is at least fun. So hopefully, like I say, hopefully more for Ben Brown. Although was Vladimir Luke running North one at the moment, 67 goals or something ridiculous to finish off the regular season. Probably won't quite get to that number. We're edging towards the end of our time together. So there's two questions I want to ask. One is purely for myself, because I have to ask, and I appreciate it's digging back into the past a little bit, but it's just because I'm Southampton based, right? And so I missed the days of the Vikings by quite some time, but I spent a fair bit of time popping over to the Isle of Wight, and only because my barber, I can literally see my barber's out the window of my house, and he knows what I do within ice hockey. And he keeps mentioning, every time I go in, he mentions Ivor Ambridge to me, who I know you played with. And the one thing I'd forgotten was looking back through the stats, that 93-94 Raiders team where you scored 136 points in 24 games. And it's you, Dan Sweeney, Ivor Ambridge. I'm pretty certain Matt Painter was on that side as well. Ben's dad, of course. Ben's pulling up trees, coaching in South One with Streatham. But there's a bunch of other. I think Tony Blaze was on that team as well. I'm pretty certain. Yeah. I've heard some stories about Ivor from my barber. I'm interested to hear if you have any stories about him, because I want to see if the two marry up.
Ivor would always put his equipment on after practice and games straight into his bag. He would never let it dry. He always liked putting on wet equipment. So
wow.
Yeah, that's the big
which
thing.
Just added to the ambiance ride, of course.
Ivor, his stuff would go, and I'd be like, "What?" And he's like, no, I like putting it on wet. So Ivor was that line of me, Dan Sweeney, and Ivor Ambridge was one of the most fun lines I've ever played with, because those two guys would just buzz around the ice, and I would just kind of and the Isle of Wight's small, but imagine I never went into any corners unless it was a fight. So all I had to do was stay like a couple of feet inside of each blue line, and the neutral zone was my area. And I would just kind of loop around, wait for pucks in the high slot, and I would just rifle it home. So they did all the work, and I scored a lot of goals. All I had to do was shoot the puck. They put the puck on my stick.
Yes, I've just pulled it up actually in the background. 67 goals that year. You're not kidding. The last question though, I think, is that, and it's a strange one in some senses, but I think I'm interested to hear your response to it, because I think there is the work that you're doing in some ways would be really, really hard to have quantitative metrics as to what success looks like. A lot of this is qualitative work, but I'm interested to hear it from you. When it comes to ReTribe, what does success look like for you guys as a team?
I think that there are some metrics that we can measure, like how many people show up every week, and how many contribute. Then there's obviously the opinion side of things with the testimonials, but it always comes down to kind of one guy in particular. Well, because there was another one the other day where guys tell me that their life has changed. There's one guy who would say he wouldn't be here today. He was in a really dark place. And then there's another guy, Dean Russell Sandwich, actually, he won't mind me telling you either. He's like,
no, his story was up the other week, wasn't it? So.
Yeah, Dino, and he, again, like, I was feeling we're quite open on these talks, and we'll say how because we built these bonds, and I was having a bit of an off day. I was stressed with the app and work and everything, and he's just like, Nick, he goes, I got to remind you this. He goes, 2 years ago, me and my family were really struggling because of my behaviors and my isolation, and his wife, his in-laws, and his kids have all said, wow, Dad, you're our dad again. And when you hear stories like that, it's like, it just warms your heart, puts a tear in your eye, and it's like, this is the work that we're doing. But then of course, obviously, like Ben scoring a goal. So you got us all these retired guys trying to figure life out, and then you got a guy who's been playing the elite leagues, goes and scores a goal because he's taken on board some of the tools that you've put forward to him. But I think really it's just us being in a place where people trust us being able to distribute some tools and say, here, pick them up, and let's keep accountable to using them, because the tools are tried and tested, and that's I guess it's just a person using one of the tools that we've given them is our measure of success.
Where can people find how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, ReTribeCollective.com. You just have to put in your email address, and the email will come straight through to me. But then I'm on all the social medias, like just Nick Rothwell, and you can look on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, and same thing with ReTribe. It's on all the social medias. And maybe you'll be kind enough to put the links in this.
Maybe. if you go into his LinkedIn as well, folks, you can watch his show reel from Sky Sports. Nick, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. All the best with it, and all the best and keep sharing the stories. It's very, very much a thing we're big on here too.
Yeah, Anthony, thank you so much, and again, congratulations on all your 15 years, and just you guys, you keep going and double it up, and I'll keep listening to your stories too.